Hey, everybody. Welcome to another section of this special series on running for office. I am joined by a great man, Brandon McKoy, here, not only president of New Jersey Policy Perspective, but a Maplewood, South Orange kid, right?
Yes.
And,
Yes.
that's probably the greatest title of all.
That's the most
Um,
important title of them all.
It is. So, Brandon, thank you for joining me here on Rethinking. Talk a little bit about the early steps of starting your political campaign.
I appreciate that you would believe I have things to offer to this conversation. So thank
I
you.
have terrible judgment, that has been said. Um, so we're going to cover a couple interesting topics here. We're going to talk a little bit about how to think about navigating the very beginning, kind of awkward moments of the campaign when you haven't really announced anything yet, but you need to start doing some of the work. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the paperwork and forms and logistics, making sure that if you're planning on doing this, that you know where you need to go to actually get all the proper procedures done. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the initial fundraising. If you've ever heard the phrase friends and family list, that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. And then I'm going to link off to some kind of guiding questions that you'll be able to download on the website at rethinkingwithalextorpey.com. These are some guiding questions that can just help you be set up for success when you're getting your campaign going. So let's hop in the time machine, Brandon, and go back to I guess it was 2010, probably
Late
late
2010.
2000. Yeah, late
Yes.
2010. And
Jesus
so
Christ, that's 10 years ago.
we are. Yeah, let's not measure all the years out here
Yes.
tonight.
Yeah.
Um, but so a friend of yours came to you with an insane idea.
Yes.
Could you share a little bit with us about what happened and what that was like?
Well, a maniac contacted me named Alex Torpey and said, I want to, I don't know what she said, but he said, come to my apartment.
Yep,
I want to talk to you
it's
about
very
something.
mysterious.
And I was like, yeah, I was like, okay, like whatever. And so I come by, I walk in. I think you said just like walk through the front door in your apartment. I walk through the front door and like you're sitting at your desk with someone else there. And you're like, hey, sit down, let's talk about some stuff. And he basically just said to us, like, I'm thinking about, I know you said thinking about or I'm going to, but the impression was I'm going to run for village president, aka mayor of South Orange, our hometown. And my first impression was, what awful timing, as I was just about to start my first semester of grad school that January.
This is at
You know,
Blaustein, right?
yeah, I was going to grad school at Blaustein at Rutgers, which is the urban planning and public policy school. But clearly, I had some interest in the topic, as that was going to be my grad degree and is my grad degree. And so it wasn't as though you just sort of like we were just hanging out one day and you're like, I think I want to run for mayor. Like the fact that it's a very professional approach. You were like, hey, come by. Like you were at your desk with your hands crossed. And it was, you clearly thought it out. Like, and you said, this is why I want to run. These are the problems I see in town. And I think we can fix them by doing X, Y, and Z. And you weren't wrong. And you rarely are, sometimes, but rarely. And I think even though I was a little frustrated by the timing, for me, it was more so you clearly had a very sharp vision of what you wanted to accomplish. And it was going to be fun. It was going to be fun to help my friend run for office in our hometown. Doesn't get a better story than that, on a real platform that was legitimate. And yeah, it was an interesting evening, but very clearly a very consequential one. And I think a lot of times we've had conversations. I know you've had conversations with others where it's like sort of the audacity you have to have,
Right.
and a bit of the just extreme belief in yourself to do that sort of thing. but that's how it is. To believe that you're the one to run for anything is you have to have true belief in yourself. And it was because you had thought it out and you had a clear vision that I had some confidence that even if it didn't work out, it was still going to be worth the while.
Still going to be an interesting experience either way.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, Brandon, and obviously for helping, because I think one of the things you also noticed is that I needed the help, which I certainly did, and often still do. And so you touched on a couple things that I think are really important for those of you out there that are thinking about running. There's a couple things that Brandon mentioned that I just want to call some attention to. One is I had spent a lot of time, we talked about this a little bit in the prior episodes. I'd spent a lot of time thinking about this, spent a lot of time trying to understand if this was the right thing to do or not. I went to every single, they're called Board of Trustee meetings in South Orange, the local governing body or town council meetings. I joined committees. Was writing for the local newspaper. I joined the rescue squad as an EMT. I was on the library board. I was doing everything I could to learn about things that were going on in town. I knew I wanted to run, but I knew I wanted to do so not for the sake of a fun thing to do, but because there were needs that the community had that I didn't think were being effectively filled. And so there was a lot of thought that had gone in before we even got to this point. I didn't want to come to my friends or even my family with an idea that was sort of not all the way thought out. I've done that before with different ideas, get excited about something and then realize a couple days or a few minutes later that maybe it was a little bit premature. But this was something that was really, really important to me. I felt this sort of, pull towards doing this and wanted to do a little bit of the legwork ahead of time. And some of the steps that we covered in the prior episodes of thinking about, is this the right time? Does my community need the skills that I have? And things like that, and making sure this wasn't just about running for office for fun. And one of the other things I want to call some attention to is that no matter who you are, no matter what you've done in your life, you can't do this on your own. There is just no model for being successful in probably any industry or field without having the support of people around you. And identifying those people early on and bringing them in and making sure they're kind of part of your project is really important. So, Brandon, I mean, when we first started talking about it, I had done a little bit of work. I had looked at some of the looked at the turnout in some of the prior elections. I thought, although this actually didn't turn out to really be true, that I was going to get some boost for, from Seton Hall having students there, but didn't end up getting a huge student turnout, partially because the election happens in May after the semester has let out for most of the students. Yeah, right. And so, but so there was a little bit, so I'd come, pretty early on, but not at the very first step. At that stage, so you were kind of thinking about, you were starting grad school.
Mm-hmm.
We were embarking on this kind of, a little bit of an unknown thing. I mean, both of us, we had talked about, and for years, I think throughout college, both of us had, in slightly similar and slightly different ways, developed some of the ideology that underpins the work that we do now, and probably built on some things earlier in high school and even earlier. But neither of us really knew how to do this. And so, I'm curious from your perspective, Brandon. I mean, this is not the only thing like that you've done. I mean, you've done a number of your own projects that have been very kind of daunting things as well. I'd just be curious. I mean, do you have any reflections to share on that? You're at the beginning, looking at something that you haven't done before, and how do you feel good about going forward at that moment in time?
I mean, I think the things that you benefited from and the effort benefited from was because you were so clear about what you wanted to accomplish. Like when people bought in, they really bought in. And like, so whether it was me or Anne or Amani or Angela or Aaron, a lot of A's going on. like folks were, there was no half-ass in it. Like folks
Right.
were into it. Like there were nights that we were at your apartment till like 4 a.m, right? Like doing work and like filling out spreadsheets and tracking data and, you know, just putting rubber bands on door hangers and whatever it was. And so that made it easier to have sort of like a band of happy warriors that were doing it together.
Right. Right.
Even though we were all, I think us being young at the time, you were 21 and I was
Probably
20.
22. Yeah. When
You were
when
22
came
and I
out.
was like
Yeah.
22, 23. We were young enough to be like, sure, right?
I would
Like,
have a little trouble with that schedule today. A little more.
yes, exactly. And I think getting that solid group of like your board of directors, to put it for lack of a better term, like your campaign team,
Right.
uh, that was very committed to it, and that we could lean on each other when we didn't know things. And we were learning a lot of things, together. Like it was the first campaign in the United States, as far as I remember, that used Nation Builder, right, and was successful.
It was the first successful campaign on Nation Builder.
Right.
Yeah.
We were using Asana to do organizing to some extent.
But this is balanced out by the fact that on a couple of the days, one of my volunteers, who shall remain nameless, but who, if listening, will know who this is, was using a rotary phone that I happened to have in my apartment to make phone calls to volunteers because his phone had fallen in a toilet or a sink or bathtub the day before. And so I will never forget that, which is watching someone do each of the dials as we're trying to get all the numbers called.
It's so good. Sacrifice.
It is.
But like it was you sort of say it's daunting, but I don't know if we really cared about that. Like, it was something that we believed in, and we believed in you and your confidence in yourself, and that was all that mattered, right? Like the dauntingness of it was, like, and there were people that were making fun of us, right? Like nonstop.
There still
are
are.
people still remain people who, when I go back to South Orange, like political opponents of ours, you're like, how's Torpey doing? And I'm like, he won. Right. You're like, I don't know why you still hang on to this.
I think it's because I won.
Right. And even there were friends of ours. I remember going to like house parties with friends from high school when they're like, psh, you guys are wasting your time. Like, you have no chance.
You're not going to win. Right.
Yeah. And I was like, all right, like, cool. But if we do, we will own that forever, and it will be amazing. And it has been, right? It was, think about Aaron went on to do all the stuff he's doing and went on to work for Cory Booker and others. I'm running the most known progressive think tank in the state of New Jersey. Like it was a good launching point. It was a good learning experience for all of us. And so even though it was daunting, I feel like we all just had a sense of, we're in this together, and who cares about the haters? And we know that we're right. Like it wasn't, I think people kept on referring to you as who's the character in Parks and Rec who messes up the town because he's like mayor at a really young age.
The Ice Town, yeah. Well, and that's only become more true since I've started doing municipal administration. I'm really following the Ben Wyatt pathway here.
Yeah, exactly, Ben Wyatt. Like people kept on saying, "This is Ben Wyatt," and we're like, "No, but whatever, right? We're just going to do this, and we're going to see what happens." And I don't know if you want to talk about how the campaign unfolded a bit, but like we learned a lot of lessons in that too. And like it was good that people underestimated you. It was good that people didn't take you seriously to some degree because we snuck in there.
Yeah, it gave us a chance to get off the ground in the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember like the days of you had to go take your campaign pictures. Yeah. And we still didn't know how to dress as adults.
No. So a lesson I'm still learning.
You're like staring into the sun, just squinting, like not smiling at all. And the photographer's like, come on, like help me out here. And I have like a pea coat that's like 3 times larger than it should be for my frame because I'm going to put this picture up in the video version. You should. But we were like, well, you need campaign pictures. That's part of what this is.
I'm thinking about the one outside of Starbucks, the two of us walking
Yes.
in
Yeah.
downtown South Orange. Yeah.
Yeah. We were just doing what we knew we had to do and what we
Right.
thought we should do.
And I think that there's so much, I appreciate the way you frame so much of that, because I think for a lot of people that are thinking about this, one of the things that disincentivizes so many people from running for office or doing anything like that is you kind of look at, we live in a world that has so much curation to it. You look at what other campaigns look like and what other politicians look like, and it looks like they've got it all figured out when there's a couple things that are true. One is look at the outcomes around us. It's pretty clear that most of them don't actually have it figured out because they're not doing an incredible job. And two, they're surrounded by professional consultants that have helped tune them and get everything worked out that way. That's not how almost anybody starts. And it doesn't have to be how you start, because really the important thing here isn't doing what other people are doing, but it's being authentic with what's important to you. And that's what we were doing. I mean, because we didn't really know any different at that point. But I'm really glad we've talked about it, because I think this is really important to hit home for people, is that this really can't be done on your own. You need this support group, and a support group that's going to not just be supportive, but keep you on track and honest, and that will tell you if you're doing things wrong, and will help you be self-reflective and self-critical. So I think, we all know we have enough people running for office who don't question themselves.
There was a night where we were putting rubber bands on your door hangers, and you were like, I don't know, guys. I kind of feel like people see me as having a big head and being narcissistic, and all the door hangers had your face on them. And we're like, Alex, of course they do. You have to be a little narcissistic to have any concept that you are the one to be mayor, right?
That's funny. I forgot about that until now.
Yeah. And just being comfortable with that, right? You can have imposter syndrome, but if you want to do it, you got to really want to do it. I was actually having a conversation with somebody else, a young professional who's got an opportunity to be an executive director of a think tank elsewhere in the country, and it was the same sort of conversations of, I don't know if I'm ready. I don't know if I have the skill set. And it was the same suggestions. You have to have your team in place. You have to know what you're good at and what you're not. And you have to, you can be unsure, but you can't really be questioning yourself too much here.
Right.
You got to really want the job.
And once you kind of make the decision to go forward here, you've got to be all in. And that's why it's so important to think through some of those questions before actually deciding to run. Because once you cross that threshold, you're not committing to running for office. You're committing to doing the job. Right. Running for office is the interview process for the job. And, that's one of the things that I think that gets, forgotten about with campaigns sometimes. That whole process is just the prologue. The real story is what you're going to do with the opportunity of being in that office. And if you're not prepared to think through what that's like, then that's something that you want to think about before you even decide to run. Now, navigating this early part can be a little bit awkward because, as I mentioned before, you're making a decision about who you're telling about this and who you're not telling about this. And I will certainly say there were people after I announced my campaign, there were people who came to me who were disappointed that they weren't included earlier on. And I truly felt bad about that. But there's kind of two lessons here. One is that is necessary for your campaign to be successful, because you can't just have the idea and then throw it all out there, right? You've got to get your team, you've got to raise some money, you've got to fill out your paperwork, you've got to get petitions, learn all the rules. There's a lot of steps here before you are ready to announce to the world that you are running for office. And during that time, that kind of secrecy is kind of important to the success of the campaign. The second lesson is that this is going to be something that in many different jobs, elected office being maybe one of the most significant, but anything where you're engaging with people publicly in any sort of advocacy position or otherwise, you're going to have to make some decisions as you navigate that about how you draw boundaries between your private life and your public life. One of the concerns that I've heard the most from people who are thinking about running for office is that they are concerned that they're going to give up their private life by being in office. And that's kind of what we're taught or told to think, I think, in more traditional media and just in cultural norms, that politicians don't really get that private life until there's like a scandal or something. But remember that you're a human. You're a private citizen first, and you are taking this time in many local positions to volunteer your time to try to help your community. You are absolutely entitled to drawing that line wherever you think is most appropriate. And so this early step of figuring out who you're going to talk to and how to navigate that without feeling bad about it, and making sure you're bringing the right people in at the right time as you build the campaign out slowly, including more and more people before your announcement. Again, that's just something that is worth having a framework for ahead of time, because it's something that you're going to have to navigate during the campaign and during the time that you are in office. So make sure to think about that before you move forward here in any of these steps. So once you've talked to some of your good friends, once they have told you, why are you doing this? This is crazy, but actually I understand it and want to help. There are a couple other things that are worth thinking about. At this point, you should already have been involved in the community that you're running in. And so you should know a lot of the local stakeholders. One of the people that you want to get to know, if possible, it's going to be a little harder in the bigger cities, but very doable in smaller cities or towns, is get to know the people who administer the elections, which is usually a municipal clerk. Municipal clerks are people who are, I think, one of the handful of underappreciated positions in local government. They are responsible for a lot, and one of the things typically are the elections. And you want to make sure you're familiar with all of the rules, not just the rules about how you're going to get petitions signed and the timeline of when there are different deadlines, making sure that you understand federal, state, and local campaign contribution rules. And remember that it's not just the federal and state. Local communities can sometimes have their own campaign contribution rules on top of that. That election official, that clerk, or someone like that is going to be a good starting point to point you in the direction of different resources to make sure you can learn all of that information. I found that most clerks, especially with someone who's trying to get involved and trying to get kind of more engaged, most clerks are really happy to kind of teach people about the process. And so make sure you have somebody that you can reach out and ask questions to, because no matter how much of the documents you review, and I read through all the manuals provided by the state and all the local laws, unless you are a lawyer already, and even if so, it's going to be hard to get everything answered. So make sure you have a contact person that you can reach out to and ask those questions about early on in the process, because that's going to be important. You want to think about when you're getting going, not just how you're getting on the ballot and election deadlines. You want to make sure you're thinking about the finance side and starting a bank account and getting a way set up quickly that you can take donations. This is pretty easy to do these days online. I mentioned this in one of the other episodes as well, but make sure you can get a card reader on your phone, because there was a number of people from our high school that I ran into on New Jersey Transit, and they said, oh, I wish I could give you money, but I don't have any cash. And I said, no problem. I've got a card reader and I can just swipe that card right here. And in the beginning of any campaign, $20 or $30 here and there, that is going to be helpful. That is going to add up, especially if you collect that person's name and email address when they give you the money, and you can start building out some of those email lists that you're going to use later. And so there are other logistics that you might want to be familiar with. Most towns, most election jurisdictions, will have a packet that they provide potential candidates that bullet points everything out in it. So get that as early as possible. And the paperwork is not the most exciting part of the process, but it is part of the commitment of doing this the right way, is making sure that you're following all the rules, that you understand, and that you understand all of them as well. All right, so you've talked to a couple of your friends, you've made the decision to do this, you've talked to a couple of friends about it, you've got some family members involved, you've got a basic understanding of what the timeline looks like, right? When certain deadlines are, what things you're going to need to do to make your campaign legitimate, making sure that you understand all of those different rules. One of the next things that you're going to do is create what is called a family and friends list for fundraising. And this is going to be the group of people that you know well enough that you can just pick up your phone and call them, and they will pick up on the other end. These aren't people that you barely know. These aren't friends of friends of friends. This isn't your college's roommates, friends, brother. It's none of those people quite yet. These are people that you have a personal relationship with that will be excited, enthusiastic, supportive potentially of you running, that you can just reach out to and hopefully get a little bit of money in the bank. Now, I know, Brandon, you've also had to do a lot of fundraising on the nonprofit side. Is there anything that you want to add as far as like, thinking about that initial fundraising list?
I mean, it's the same thing. Close friends, ask them to give money, ask them to support everything you're doing, because if they won't support you, who will? Also, just, obviously family members. And then you sort of do like a power map, right? You sort of do like a circle, or like you work out in concentric circles of saying, I have my very close friends and folks who absolutely need to support me. Then who do they know that would be interested in this idea or this exercise, and get those folks contacts. And you want to hear no. You don't want to hear no too much, but if you're not hearing no, you're either not asking enough people or you're not asking for enough money.
Great point.
Right. And so no is not the worst thing in the world to hear, because it gives you a sense of where you are, and if you're approaching people well, or if you're approaching enough people.
And you're going to hear it plenty when you go door to door. So get
Absolutely.
used to it. Yep. Do you have a moment for our election today? No. That's going to happen.
Yes. And to that point, though, honestly, because I think a lot of times when people think about high voter turnout versus low voter turnout, and like highly educated and engaged voters versus not, I think folks tend to assume that like, well-off, highly educated people are going to be engaged politically. I mean, South Orange, Maplewood, what's the average home price? Like over $600,000, easy. And I think it's got one of the highest rates of like college grads in the state, in a very already highly educated state. What was the turnout for your election?
9%.
Right.
Yeah.
Right now, some people say, well, it's a May election versus a November,
but still,
yeah, it still should not be that. And it's a town of like 17,000 people.
Yeah, it was about 10,500 registered voters, and 90% of them did not vote in the election. Of a 23-year-old, which again, I mean, I think I've joked about this before in other episodes, but like, the fact that you could have someone that young running, you've got to have an opinion on that. It's either a great idea or a terrible idea, but it can't be, NA.
Either you like Ben Wyatt or you don't like Ben Wyatt.
Right.
There's something here.
Right.
Yeah, and just did not. I mean, like, obviously we hit, the pavement, and we got a lot of folks out to vote on election day, and we had a lot of people out there knocking doors, but it was very sort of like deflating from a like 10,000 foot level of like, this is a community that should be engaged. And that's actually part of the reason you ran. You were like, nobody knows what's going on in town.
Right.
The council just says, don't worry, we got it. But that's not how government should operate. And a lot of the things you did while you were mayor was to say, it shouldn't matter who is the mayor. There are certain things the town should be able to do. There are certain core competencies we should have as a government, regardless of who is in the seat. And that was a good reason to run. I think that did resonate with people, but even so, it was still very low engagement.
It was. And I mean, but it's amazing because, and we, it's a community of so many smart and interesting people who, is like, well, why aren't these people contributing in some way to what's happening in town? Like, why aren't there ways for them to get involved? And, I think South Orange now, is one of the communities that does a, phenomenal job with engaging people on a broader level. There's so many different ways to get involved with the government. And so, that was one of the really important things. And that's part of what you're going to be doing on the campaign. And just remember that, nobody's going to be as excited about this as you are when you're going door to door or making your friends and family. Now, your friends and family list, those people should be pretty excited. And so let's do a little like kind of game here. All right. So you can talk to your direct family members. You can talk to your best friends. You can talk to friends from college and from high school, former professors, as long as you did okay in the class.
So So you didn't talk to anybody from high school? You didn't talk to any professors from high school?
I got to know them really well in detention, so we actually had a really great relationship. Yeah, I think
you should have asked Mr. Healy for $100. That would have been the best thing ever.
That probably would not have netted me $100.
Chair, corner, now.
Yeah, there is definitely a history of questioning authority, especially when people in those positions don't appreciate the fact that they don't get to just control other humans because they're in that position.
That was actually one of the greatest things about watching you run, is just seeing people that were like adults when we grew up being like, wait a minute, what?
I had a little bit of a hard time convincing Campbell's parents, mother specifically, I think, because I had been part of their carpool and was often late. And only within a couple of years of that was asking for their vote for mayor. And I would like to say that I had matured in that time period.
And Jean's the lawyer, so she's like, hey,
yes,
this is not a joke.
Like, no. Yeah. But these are some of the, I mean, especially being young, especially running in the town that you grew up in, you're going to run into these sorts of things and take it in stride, because really at the end of the day, this is one of the most incredible opportunities that any of us could have access to. I mean, it's really, truly incredible that we live in a time and a place that allows anyone, someone who doesn't belong to a political party, doesn't give political people lots of money, is not in any favor in any of those circles, the ability to get involved like this and actually not just participate, but actually lead an entire government for multiple years at a time is really incredible. And so whether you win or whether you lose, I mean, the whole process here really is amazing. All right, so former teachers, former professors, coworkers, distant family. Anybody else that we can think of on that first friends and family list?
That's about it, I think.
People you've matched with on online dating apps.
That wasn't a thing back then yet,
that wasn't a thing, no. We're going to start aging ourselves shortly.
Yeah.
But really the goal here, right, is you want to create that list, maybe 10 or 15 people in the beginning of people that you can just have your first conversations with. And you want to approach those conversations. I mean, Brandon, I appreciate, your reflection on the work that I put in before I even came to you, because it was important. It was really important to me to show anybody that I was talking to about this, especially people that I was asking for time and for help on this, that I was taking this seriously. And it's important to do that legwork. And you're going to practice that pitch with that friends and family list. Get some of the kinks worked out of who you are and why you're running and why you need their financial support on your campaign at this time. And you've got to get all that down in 30 or 45 seconds or less. And so this is a good opportunity. It's kind of a nice safety net, because if you mess something up with your friends and family list, it's unlikely that someone's not going to give you money because you didn't make the pitch the right way. They'll give you another chance, but most people out there aren't going to be that forgiving. So get that list together and reach out to them and see what kind of money that you can bring in. Make sure that you've got all the other stuff set up first, right? Do not start accepting contributions until you are cleared from a legal perspective on having your bank account set up and all those things done. Again, it's important to do all this stuff the right way. Once you've gotten to that list of 10, 15, 20 people, you might want to consider putting together a bigger list. I think mine came in, maybe 6 weeks later, and it was actually a fundraising attempt, not to raise a certain amount of money, but to raise from a certain number of donors. And I think the milestone was 50 donors, which we did hit. And it was like 50 donors in 7 days or 10 days or something. And that's when I went back to like my contact book, in my email, and started emailing people maybe one level out that I didn't know quite as well. And starting to bring some of that money in really early. Because again, before you make your announcement, you're going to need a little bit of money in your bank account for the website, for some of the mail pieces, for some of the advertising. You might not have paid staff. You might have paid staff early on. You might have to hire an accountant to do bookkeeping. There's going to be all sorts of different things early on that you might need money for. So before you make the official announcement, that is really the period of time that we're kind of talking about here. Now, one of the other things that's worth kind of going through, I'm going to link a document on the website. So you can go to rethinkingwithalextorpey.com and find the post about this series of episodes. And I will have a Word document or a PDF up there that are some sort of guiding questions and exercises that you can do just to kind of help you think through some of the details of the campaign. It's sort of like a, almost like a preliminary project planning, just to get your mind working on some of these things. And for me, I like doing that and writing them down and talking to people about it. That much I think is clear. But it's at least worth spending some time mulling over some of those questions. And as you lead up to getting ready to announce, you want to make sure that you have, at this stage, you might want to even have your voter file already. You don't have to have it at this point, but it might be worth having. And you want to keep that sort of simple setup, a little bit of a website, a little bit of a social media presence that we talk about in the next episodes, to make sure that you have a professional first impression, especially if you're a challenger candidate or you are running from outside the kind of power structure at all. If you're anything other than what people are expecting you to be or look like, you need to make sure everything else is going to be in really good condition, because people are going to judge you more harshly than they might otherwise.
Yep.
So
be prepared. That's the Lion King song.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. I mean, it's definitely worth living by lots of lessons from The Lion King.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good guiding framework if there is ever one.
Thank you.
All right, so this is a little bit of an overview that we've covered just leading up to kind of your campaign announcement. And maybe I'll just spend a moment on that. When you're thinking about that announcement date, this is going to be a really exciting day. You want to put a few of these different pieces together and make sure you have it all coordinated. You probably are going to have talked to the local newspaper ahead of time, if possible. If you have a relationship with the journalist or reporter such that you know that they will hold the story up until you tell them. One of the other things that's worth doing that we haven't talked about yet is, I think one of the good things to do here is to give a heads up to other people that you're about to announce. So, for example, before I announced, I called the sitting mayor in South Orange, and it was a quite an awkward phone conversation.
He wasn't planning on running again, though.
That had not been announced yet, so we didn't know at this point what he was planning on doing, and we were kind of not waiting, but like, all right, like nobody else is announcing. I was the first candidate to announce, so I called him and said this is going to be coming out tomorrow. I wanted to give you a heads up. I thought that was the kind of respectable thing to do. I'm not running because of something you did wrong or something personal. I just think there are things that I can bring to the table here. And I'm planning on running a totally positive campaign, and which we did, and talking about the issues that I care about and the things that I want to work on. I appreciate the time you've put in, and just wanted you to know, here's what I'm doing. That is, I think that's a good thing to do in a situation like that. It's always worth trying to stay on the kind of high road during elections, and can't hurt to get off on the right foot in that regard, even if
that's
you're
actually good. That's a good lesson in politics in general, which I think is sometimes dumb, but like sometimes you can avoid people being really upset at you if you just give them a heads up.
Right.
Like if they just know the bad news or the annoying news is coming, they value that. And even though there are some situations where I think that is silly,
right,
and absurd, there are some situations where it totally makes sense, and it would behoove you as an individual to give people a heads up.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good management lesson in general,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
And don't worry about what they're going to say. You know, it might be weird, it might be awkward, but them having one day heads up or something is not going to make or break anything really. Make sure you've got all your ducks in a row beforehand for the next day. So you've got your website ready to go, which you've been keeping password protected or something ahead of time. You've got some news articles that might be coming out. Maybe you've got a video that you're planning on putting out there. Maybe you're going to do some social media posting. Maybe you're going to send an email blast out. Maybe you're going to have an in-person event somewhere, like a high visibility place in your community. These are all things that you can think about on that announcement day. And you want to really kind of hit the streets as much as possible on that day and start knocking on doors and letting people know that, you know, you're running a real campaign here and that you're serious about it. And those are just a couple things to think about leading up to sort of the your announcement day. Before we kind of tie this up, Brandon, is there anything that you wanted to kind of mention here on any of these different things that we haven't really touched on?
I think a lot of campaigning is a sort of balance between preparation and not overanalyzing, because there are things that you should analyze and you should be prepared, because especially if you're younger, and as someone who is much older than I look, I have, you know, like it behooves me to be prepared to know exactly what I'm talking about when I enter a space,
Right.
with folks my age or above, because they're and oftentimes it's been like, who's this high schooler? And it's like, president, actually, but okay.
Like I was in high school, but that was like
Yes.
10 or 15 years ago. Don't remind me.
Right, exactly. And then like once you just how you carry yourself, you know, people realize, oh, this okay, you're not young. But being prepared and knowing that you're taking this seriously. And as I said, that was important for you to communicate that this was something that was not just a random idea or a fly by night decision. And also being prepared about and thinking about how folks would perceive your candidacy. There was a lot of work that I did. I don't know if you remember, like on like the community forums, sort of like
Oh,
dismissing, you know, rumors about you and like, you know, tamping
I thought you were
down
starting the rumors.
lies. that should have been a good gig to have somebody pay
Yeah,
me.
that's true.
To actually,
I think they're out of business now, actually.
yeah, double agent.
Online,
Yeah. But like, just what are all the spaces in which conversation about the election is going to happen?
Right.
And make sure you have someone or people engaged in that space. Because I think a lot of the things when it comes to running campaigns, and I'm thinking about this a lot actually in light of the recent presidential election, is a lot of folks get wrapped up on what's your message and how do you craft your message. Your message doesn't matter if you don't have a communications infrastructure that makes sure your message is delivered to the people in the way you want it to be heard.
Right.
Right. And there's so many folks who they deliver a message at a press conference and think that that's speaking to the public. But by the time the media, you know, sort of filters it, and, you know, then social media filters it and somebody else shares it, it's warped past the point of what you thought you were delivering. And so, as often as you can, speaking directly one to one to your constituents so they can hear you and not hear you through somebody else is super, super critical. And I think there's a lot of challenges that people have when they run for office because they don't have a direct line to voters, and they get caught up in, are they crafting the right message? But just deliver the message that you have and make sure you're delivering it directly to people.
Great. I mean, that's such a good point, and that was an important tenet of that was an important kind of policy initiative of the campaign and of the time in office. And I know something both of us care a lot about in the work that we do,
Yep.
and something desperately needed in New Jersey and beyond.
Absolutely.
More of that.
Yeah.
So, all right. So we've covered some pretty good stuff here. We've talked a little bit about, you know, letting some of your first initial friends or family members know about what you're doing and that you've made a decision to move forward here, and kind of what that's like, and some of the legwork that you might want to do ahead of time to make sure you're approaching that in a way that captures the confidence of your friends and family, and especially if you're asking them to help out on what you're doing. We've talked a little bit about that early step of the campaign can be a little awkward about who you let in at what time, and that's a boundary or a line that you're going to have to navigate as you go. And so it's something worth taking seriously and using that as a trial run to kind of see how you navigate all of that. And that at the end of the day, it's okay to do this in the way that is best for your campaign. That's the goal here. And hopefully people who care about you and support you will understand that. It's important making sure you follow all of the legal regulations and procedural rules about running for office. Make sure you have some contact people at your state election agency, at your county board of elections, in your local government, often your municipal clerk. Make sure you've got somebody that you can reach out to with questions so that you don't do anything by mistake that you were uncertain about but didn't have the chance to reach out to anyone. For bigger campaigns, you're probably going to have a legal team and some consultants or staff who are going to advise you on the logistical steps. For the smaller campaigns, you're going to want to try and get that packet from your local government, often your municipal clerk, of the sort of checklist of different things that you're going to need to do. And make sure you understand and are aware of all of that before you really get going with anything else. And certainly before you start accepting any money.
Did you talk about treasurer at all?
No, and it's different state by state. I mean, in New Jersey, you do have to appoint a treasurer, and that is someone who you are required to also list along with your campaign name at the bottom of all of your campaign literature, the paid for line. And so, having that treasurer early on is going to be important. They're the person who's going to basically be the bookkeeper of your campaign, and it should not be the candidate, and it may not be able to be the candidate, depending on where you are. But it should be someone ideally who has bookkeeping experience. And that is one thing. Thanks for bringing that up, because that is one thing as a candidate, you do not want to be spending your time going through bookkeeping records while you should be out talking to voters, which is basically the only thing that the candidate should really be doing. And we're going to talk more about that in some of the next episodes. So yeah, you want to make sure to get that set up early on. And that person ideally is someone who actually has some political experience or some campaign experience, so they know how to navigate the election laws in the state that you're in. But remember, there are federal laws, state laws, and local laws. And you want to make sure that you are aware of all of them so that you do this the right way. You want to, excuse me, we talked a little bit about your initial friends and family list, putting that list together of 10 or 15 people who you can just pick up the phone and call, and they will just pick up and say, hey, Alex, how's it going? And those are the people that you're going to kind of practice your first fundraising pitches on, and bring a little bit of early money in to get your campaign going, and use that as a testing ground for some of the fundraising you'll have to do later. And then you might want to think about some of these questions that I'm going to post on the website that are just meant to help you think through your time in office, think through your campaign a little bit, so that when you really get going, you do have a clear idea. And I do think that's one thing, that we did on my campaign really well is, everybody was telling me to delete text off of things because I had so much detail of all the different policies we wanted to do. Yeah. But that's the kind of campaign I wanted to run, because that's the kind of official that I wanted to be, was someone who was detail oriented and did the legwork and, wasn't shy about that. And so it's worth thinking through some of those questions and thinking about how you want to approach that going forward. So that's an overview of thinking about the very beginning of starting your campaign. On the next episodes, we are going to be joined by, now we're building this reputation for Aaron, because we've mentioned him a few times in this one, by Aaron Strauss Garcia, who's going to talk to us a little bit about how to actually run your campaign once you get it going. So Brandon, I thank you for joining me tonight, but really more than that, I thank you for helping me in all of this in 2010 and 2011. I remember, as we were talking about it earlier, I remember having the conversation with you, and you were talking about grad school, and I was like, shit, what am I going to do if Brandon, if I don't have any help here? And so I am very glad, that worked out and provided this amazing experience for all of us to sort of launch into what we're doing now.
Are you going to talk about the culmination of the campaign?
I don't know what you're referring to, so maybe.
Well, you're talking about how it's important to get folks involved and engaged, especially for you, considering how close it was. And it was
Yes.
literally a situation where any one person didn't do their job,
Right.
you would have lost.
Yeah. And the 12 votes, I mean, any single thing we didn't do, if we hadn't done it, might not,
Right.
lots of things would be very different.
My dad walking up in Newstead, knocking on
Yep.
doors, other people walking over in Montrose, like every single little bit matters.
Everything. My parents hit the pavement pretty hard.
Yep.
And
Yep.
yeah, I mean, it was, and I should take a moment out. I mean, so we've talked a little bit, Brandon, about how much you helped and how early on that was, and we've talked about a few other people, but there were a lot of people who put a lot of time into this small race,
Yes.
and it is it's amazing when you start getting going and people start getting excited about it and wanting to help out. But there's so many great people out there, and if you can be someone to facilitate those people coming together around something, and that I feel like that's when you're kind of onto something.
Mhm.
And that's what it felt
Absolutely.
like back when we were working on this campaign.
Absolutely. No, thank you for having me on and thinking these things through and talking these things through. Running for office and honestly wanting to be in leadership in general is no small task, and requires a lot of forethought and preparation. And even once you're in the position itself, requires a lot of having your team of people around you who you can vent to, and who will help you, be successful in the long term. And so, yeah, no one should take running for office lightly, but also you probably shouldn't take it too heavily, right? Like a lot of people are daunted by the idea of running for office, and that's why we don't have as much actual community and public representation in elected office as we deserve in this country.
Here.
So definitely probably take more of a risk than you're used to, but look before you leap.
Right. Oh, that's a great note to leave off on. And for those of you listening and watching, you'll be definitely hearing from Brandon more in the future, I think, as we get this podcast going. And so thanks, Brandon, again, for joining and helping with everything, and for sharing some of those thoughts. And everybody else for listening and watching. Make sure to check out the next episodes where we talk about actually running your campaign and working your way towards election day. Talk to everybody soon.